Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your angels and guides who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to help you open to your magic and your wisdom and your angels. You can learn more about my services and offerings at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. But for now, I'm here to help you rest and connect with waves of divine love that are here for you. And I want to start off by saying thank you for the blessing of getting to spend this time with you. I find podcasts to be a very intimate experience. I put my earbuds in or I play it in the car. And there's something about making the personal choice to listen to a podcast when you want to hear it that feels very intimate to me. And so I appreciate you inviting me into this moment in time with you. I do so with tremendous love and appreciation for you. So I invite you to take a deep breath in and release. And my hope is that this podcast is helping you to find your center, to help you feel replenished and nurtured. And if you have been listening for a while and it is helping you, I would love to hear from you. It's always a blessing to know how this podcast is rippling into the world. And if you feel so guided to leave a review or share about the podcast with friends, we are getting the word out in a very organic way. And so any ripple you bring forward that helps spread the word about the podcast is greatly appreciated. And for now, the angels and I are here for you. As I record this, the energy to me feels very still and quiet. There's a metaphor that the angels sometimes use when we are talking about co-creation. So many of us have internalized the teachings of things like law of attraction and taking action and really being the masters of our creative cycles. And it's not that we wield no influence over our creation cycles, but the angels remind us that we are creating in a realm that is also in its own creation cycle. So our creation cycles are taking place in the creation cycles of this dimension. And a way to describe it better would be to imagine for a moment that you are a master surfer. You're fantastic at surfing. You get up in the early hours to get to the beach. You live near the ocean in this fantasy. You have your wetsuit that I must say you look awesome in this, again, if we're making the visual, let's go all the way. You look great in your wetsuit. You have the perfect surfboard that has been perfectly waxed, and you get yourself to the ocean. What you have no dominion over, however, is the state of the ocean. The ocean is calm. It doesn't matter how good you are at surfing or how top line your equipment is. If the ocean is calm, it may be a better day for paddleboarding or just kind of hanging out and enjoying the calm of the ocean. And then some mornings there are going to be amazing waves that'll take you for the ride of your life. And the angels use this metaphor because we often confuse the state of the ocean with our personal dominion. So, in the kind of energy that I'm feeling right now, it feels still. We're still in the experience of this week's eclipse, and Mercury is in retrograde. And as I go within, I find almost zero desire for productivity or adventure. I am perfectly content to be in the quiet, knowing that even in the stillness, movement is happening. You see, it doesn't help to rage at the ocean when it is still. Just like the trees in the winter, there are times when we go quiet. One of my teachers says, there is a difference between inertia and incubation. And my sense is a lot of us are in a state of incubation right now. So much has been changing over the past few years. We have been changing with it. The circumstances of life are shifting. And it takes time to acclimate to the new. I'll also share with you another pearl of wisdom from the angels about the collective energies. So this happened, I don't know, about 10 years ago, right around the 2012 hubbub. I was in one of my classes and the energy felt just crazy to us. And during one of my classes, someone asked Josephus and the angels, that's the group of guides that I channel, they asked Josephus, when is the energy going to calm down? And Josephus said, well, we have good news and bad news. The bad news is that it's not. This is your new normal. And the new normal will continue to shift. But here's the good news. You are ever evolving beings. You are always acclimating to what is. Just like when you travel to a city with a higher altitude. A bird just went by. Hello, bird. Talking of higher altitudes. When you go to a city with a higher altitude, it takes time for your body to acclimate. And this is true of our energy bodies as well. So when these passages of stillness happen, you're not doing anything wrong, and you're not being lazy. You're not being left behind. That feels like a big one, yeah? Ooh, let's just bring up that energy of left behind, right? You're not being left behind. We're just floating along for a little while until the next wave comes and finds us. At least that's the way I experience it. Over the years, what I have discovered about myself is that I am terrible about efforting my way through something. I am absolutely willing to work hard for something that I really want and that really appeals to me. But the caveat is that it usually doesn't feel like work. I'm not great at pushing through something because I should. I've always been stubborn that way. So when the energy is still, even when I desire movement, I have learned to just sit in it, because somewhere beyond my linear perception of events, movement is taking place. And actually, I'm going to be weaving this into tonight's story for you. A story about a slow-moving experience of magical manifesting. Things are always moving to your benefit. That's my belief. Sometimes we just have to wait. But each day we move forward, even if it is a little bit at a time. I'll share one other story. Quick, this isn't the story. This is just following this line of energy of stillness. Many years ago, I was driving home. This is when I lived in Los Angeles, and it was the weekend of the LA Marathon. And it was probably around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and typically marathons start early in the morning. And that year, the marathon happened to go through my neighborhood, or an extension of my neighborhood where I would be driving. And it was about 1 or 2 in the afternoon as I was driving home. And I could see on the street, on the sidewalk actually, there were a few clusters of people walking with their marathon numbers on. And they looked exhausted. They must have been walking since early in the morning. And my heart just opened up for them. And I wondered in that moment what they were thinking. Were they thinking, I am awesome that I have been walking this far for this long? Or were they feeling sad because it was so hard for them, right? That they hadn't yet gotten close to the finish line. And that really stuck with me. And I recognize that sometimes we move forward in what seems to be fractions of inches. And we can't always measure our progress or our success when we are in that place. We cannot always judge our progress based on external milestones. So wherever you are in your life right now, whatever is transpiring, whether you have super high energy and are being very productive, or maybe you've got nothing left in your tank, trust that the angels know what's happening for you right now. They get it. They love you and they're team you. And the thing about angels is they help bring you energy. So they're watching over you, and things in the ethers are moving around to support you in ways you cannot yet imagine. That your hopes and your dreams and your prayers are being received in the heart of God. And movement is happening even when it seems like the waters are still. I promise this is what is happening. So beautiful when you take a deep breath in, if you so desire. I don't mean to sound so directive. It's an invitation to take your deep breath in and let your body receive, and then just release whatever is here to be released in this moment. Just let it go. Let it out. Give it to the angels and to God. And feel the love coming to you. And the angels are already here, but I have not officially invited them in. And I always love this part. I'm a girl who loves ritual. So let's do that now. So I invite you to join me in taking a beautiful breath in as we call ourselves forward into the heart of God. And beautiful angels on high, we ask that you join us here. We ask that you infuse this broadcast with waves of love that are calibrated for each of the beloveds that are listening right now. Angels, I know that you know what is in each of their hearts. I know that you know what each of us is carrying in our prayers. And I ask that you bring forward blessings of light and lightness of spirit, that you bring forward blessings of healing and service to the highest and best good of all concerned. I ask that you bring forward peace of heart, knowing that we are walking this path that is paved with love, knowing that we are not alone in this journey, and that you, beautiful angels, carry us in your hearts and prayers through every single breath of our lives. And dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in and allow your body. Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, bringing you this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep. To relax as a wave of relaxation pours over you, allowing yourself to go deeper into the pillow of love the angels are cultivating for you. So much love is flowing through right now. Allow it to reach the deepest parts of your being. And there's nothing you need to do right now except receive. If you're drifting off, that's okay. I promise I won't share anything too important. But you can just follow the sound of my voice as the angels and I keep you company as you drift off to sleep or as you have a good rest, knowing that you are wrapped in the love of your angels and of God. You are a blessing here on earth. You are a blessing in this world. And we are so deeply grateful for you. Thank you for the gift of you. You are the best present ever. Truly, you are. And I'm so grateful to have this time with you. So you just cozy on up and snuggle on in and let yourself drift off. And while you do, I'm going to tell you a story. So tonight I am going to be sharing with you some reflections of my life. And I have to say that the theme I'm going to be sharing with you just delights me, so hopefully the energy will feel light and fluffy to you as you drift off. And this story has something to do with my childhood and celebrity crushes. What's life without some celebrity crushes when you're growing up, right? And an experience of magical manifesting into my later years. So you just snuggle on in and I will tell you my story. So I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. I was born in 1962. And I think it's a fairly common rite of passage to have crushes on celebrities, yes? I mean, if you think back, who were your celebrity crushes, if you had any? Mine go far enough back that I even remember having a crush on Speed Racer. It was a manga cartoon. I thought he was so cute. And it didn't seem to be a problem that he was a cartoon and I was a live girl, but I had a crush on Speed Racer at some point in my early years. I thought he was so cute. So I don't know if you ever had a crush on a cartoon, although now that anime is more prevalent, perhaps that's more common than it was in the 60s. And I shared this on another episode when I talked about television in the early 70s, but my first, aside from Speed Racer, of course, my first bona fide celebrity crush was Bobby Sherman, who you may have never heard of. He was a very cute boy, and he had been on the television show of 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, which I don't think I ever saw. I think the show had been canceled by the time I came fully into my love of Bobby. And as I shared on another episode, I learned about Bobby from my super cool neighbor friend who is a few years older than me. In the last episode, I said she was 4 years older, but she actually listened to that episode and reminded me that she's only 3 years older. So I deduct a year. I'm sorry. So one day she came down the block because she lived on the other end of the block from where I lived. And I seem to recall she was carrying a TV guide. I don't know for sure, but it was something that had Bobby's picture on it. And she explained to me how she loved Bobby Sherman and the nuances of it. And in that moment, I decided that I loved him too, because I thought she was so cool and had it all together, and Bobby was cute. And it's like I learned how to have a celebrity crush in that moment. I was like, I love him too. And so I remember walking back into my house thinking, I love Bobby Sherman, even though I didn't know anything about him. And at some point, my mom, it must have been my mom, my father wouldn't have gotten it for me. This is not a conversation I would have had with my father, but somehow I got Bobby's album. And the album was just a close-up of his face and his big blue eyes. I think they were blue. In my imagination, they're blue. And his very cool feathered hair, because remember, it's like the 60s and 70s. And I would play his album on my record player. Now, if you grew up in that generation, you may have had a portable record player that was in your bedroom as well. It was the kind that could also play 45s if you would put that little plastic dongle in the middle of a 45. But this was an album, so I didn't need the dongle. And I would listen to his album while I stared into his picture. And he would sing, Julie, 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 do you love me? It was such a deep song, right? And I would wish and imagine that I could meet Bobby Sherman, that I could talk to him, that he would call me on the phone, and that I could meet him. That was probably as rich as my fantasies got at that moment, because I was 8 years old, right? They didn't get much deeper than that, other than I wanted to meet him, I wanted to talk to him, I wanted him to know me, right? So throughout my life, I have always reflected that Bobby Sherman was the first man I ever loved. And truly, I loved him. And that was also the era of Tiger Beat magazine. I don't know how many of you remember Tiger Beat. And there still must be some variation of that, I'm sure, although now that everything is online, perhaps Instagram is just that version of Tiger Beat come to life. But back then, our teen idols were carefully packaged for our consumption. They were these glossy magazines. It was Tiger Beat and Teen Beat, I seem to recall. And there would be these very, very cute boys with feathered hair. They had to have long feathered hair because, again, the 60s and 70s. And their PR packages were perfect, right? And written for the audience of young girls. So no political beliefs or anything like that. You know, it's like, whatever they would say, I don't remember, but I'm making this up. Bobby likes to have oatmeal for breakfast. Whatever that would be. And we just would eat these things up. We would get them. I remember there was a magazine shop back when they had magazine shops. You guys remember those? Where they would have every kind of magazine ever, and they would have comic books. There was one in Evanston, I remember. I grew up in Skokie, and we would go there, and it seemed like hours. I don't know that either of my parents would let us shop for hours. Maybe they let us shop for 20 minutes. It seemed like hours to me. And we would go through the teen magazines to see which had the cutest pictures. And then we would also get Archie comic books and Richie Rich and Mad Magazine and all of those things that we consumed back then. I'm just pausing for a minute over the joy of a magazine store when I was younger. God, those were wonderful, weren't they? Okay, so we'll keep going, though, with the celebrity teenage crushes. So my sister and I always had to share the magazines. My mother was not going to buy 2 copies of Tiger Beat. So my sister loved David Cassidy. I loved Bobby Sherman. So we had an agreement. My sister got David, I got Bobby, and the other big teen idol at the time was Donny Osmond. And so we split Donny. That should David, Bobby, and Donny come to our house, my sister would get David, I would get Bobby, and Donny would, be with both of us. Not in a creepy way, of course, just in a sweet 8 and 9-year-old way, right? They would be our friends. And my sister and I shared a bedroom at that time, and we were so groovy. It was a groovy bedroom. My mom let us pick out the wallpaper. This was back in the wallpaper days. And our wallpaper was bright lime green, bright lemon yellow, and bright orange. Very 60s or 70s. I get them all confused, but you know what I mean. And it was in a checkerboard pattern, these large squares with this white ribbon that ran through the pattern. So if you can imagine, if you will, bright fluorescent green, orange, and yellow checkerboard with a ribbon going through it. And we loved it. Oh, and it was vinyl, so it was shiny. It was this shiny wallpaper that we loved. It was so on trend at that time. And we would take the Tiger Beat and Teen Beat magazines and cut them up. And my sister's side of the room, we were very definitive about our sides of the room, which you will know if you've ever shared a room. Your area is sacred, yes. And she would tape up pictures of David on her side, and I had pictures of Bobby on my side, and then Donnie could be on either one of our sides. Those were our rules. Did you ever make up rules like that if you had a sibling, right? It's like you have your own code of honor, your own code of ethics of how things are supposed to work. And, as the years went on, tastes would change. I think my last schoolgirl celebrity crush was Sean Cassidy, because the Hardy Boys, yes. And to Do Run Run, which was the song that he sang, which was actually a classic song, but he brought it back out. And yes, I did go to a Sean Cassidy concert. So there you go. So I think Sean Cassidy was my last official teenage celebrity crush. Now, that doesn't mean that I've never had other celebrity crushes, but they weren't necessarily filled with that romantic, hopeful, maybe one day, someday, we will meet and we will know each other. Because that's what I remember about those times, was the purity of the crush. It was so pure and innocent. Back in those days, there wasn't anything like the paparazzi that we have now. Sure, there was the National Enquirer, but the National Enquirer was not interested in the gotcha stories of teen idols because their readership didn't really care. Or maybe they were reporting on it and I just didn't know, because there's no way I would have read those magazines back then. Versus now, we know everything about celebrities. We're in their kitchens with them, right? It's a very different culture and time. But back then, they were just packaged up, all beautiful and ready for the consumption of their prepubescent and early adolescent audiences. So they, I'm sure there were articles like, what kind of girl does Bobby like? They would never have said, what kind of woman does Bobby like? Right? And unfortunately, I don't think any of the celebrities ever interviewed said, you know what? I really like chubby, curly-haired, red-headed, blue-eyed girls from Skokie. It would usually be something like, I like girls who are sweet and fun and love their parents or something. There would be some sort of really trite answer. And I will also just quickly reflect, because I did share this in the other podcast, that there was an awesome episode of The Partridge Family where Bobby Sherman was a guest star back in the 70s. So you had David Cassidy and Bobby Sherman sharing screen time. It was a whole event. It was publicized in Tiger Beat. We all watched it. And remember, there were no VCRs. There were no pausing it and watching it over and over again. It was like a one-time event until it came up in reruns again. So that is the story of the first man I ever loved, Bobby Sherman. But wait, there's more. So fast forward now. It's now, I don't know, maybe somewhere in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And I was working for a home video company. And the owner of the company was someone who had popularity in the 60s. And I'm not going to share with you who he is right now, because that'll probably be a story for another day. He can't just be a sideline in my Bobby Sherman story. So I'm just going to kind of gloss over that. Just bear with me and we'll get back to that another time. But he knew a lot of people in the entertainment industry, and I was his assistant. And I knew that he knew Bobby Sherman. I hadn't really thought much about it. It's not as if I was all giggly that he knew Bobby Sherman. I just, somehow it came up and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then one day, my friend Bill, who was on the phones, it must have been the lunch hour or something, and he was manning the phones. And where my desk was situated, I could see the receptionist desk. So Bill and I could see each other. And Bill answers the phone, and then he buzzes my line. And he says, Laurel, Bobby Sherman's on the phone for, and then he said my boss's name. And that moment, something cracked open for me, and I looked at him. And I said something along the lines of, get the F out. Like, are you kidding me? Wait, what? That was, and he looked at me like, I'm crazy. What's your problem? And he laughed. He goes, Bobby Sherman's on the phone for my boss. And I was like, okay. And I took the deepest breath, and I was very professional. And I said, so-and-so's office, how can I help you? And he said something along the lines of, hi, this is Bobby Sherman calling for so-and-so. Is he available? And I said something like, you know what? I'm afraid he's out of the office. Can I take a message and have him call you back? I was very professional. And then I wrote down Bobby's name on one of those phone log books. Do you remember the ones that were, had two, it was like a carbon copy, right? And it was the pink, phone message books where there were usually 4 slips on a page, and you would write down the name and the phone number on the piece of paper and then hand one to your boss, and then you would have the copy in your book. So I wrote down Bobby Sherman and Bobby's phone number and hung up. And my friend is like, what just happened? I said, you don't understand. That was Bobby Sherman, the first man I ever loved. And there was something about that moment. By that point, I hadn't gone through my awakening yet, but I had been delving into the New Age and metaphysics and Louise Hay. And somehow I recognized that in that moment, the dream of my 8-year-old girl had just come true, some 20-something years later. That I just talked to Bobby Sherman on the phone. And how did that really happen? Like, there was something about the serendipity of that moment. And even though Bobby wasn't calling for me, that somehow the portals of my life aligned so that 20-something years later, I would get to talk to Bobby on the phone. So when my boss came in, I said to him, Bobby called for you. And he said, oh, thank you. And I said, just so you know, he was the first man I ever loved. And that was really cool for my 8-year-old self to be able to talk to him. And my boss looked at me. He had a Texas accent. He's like, oh, Laurel, I am so embarrassed for you. I said, I know, me too, but isn't that the best story ever? And we both laughed. So that was part of my my joyful story of manifestation. But wait, there's more. So Bobby was friends with my boss and one of their other friends. And so, every once in a while he would call, and at some point I moved on from being my boss's assistant to going into the marketing department, which is a whole other story. But many years later, maybe 3 or 4, I don't know. It felt later. I worked for that company until the end of 92, so maybe it was 90 or 91. We had a Christmas party for the company, and Bobby was invited. Because, different people would get invited to the parties. And listen, I had been in the entertainment industry long enough to know that you do not make a fuss about people, especially if they're there on their personal time. If you're meeting a celebrity at a movie premiere, not that I ever went to movie premieres, but there are times when it's appropriate to let a celebrity know that, I'm so excited to meet you and your work means a lot to me. But at something like a corporate Christmas party, it's not a cool thing if I'm an employee of the company, if someone recognizable is there in a personal capacity. That is not the time nor space to gush over them. It's just inappropriate. All of these subtle rules about the entertainment industry, but it's understandable because they're human beings and they want to just go and, live their lives just like the rest of us. So my good friends at the company, though, knew my Bobby story. And there was some alcohol involved. It was a Christmas party and we had some cocktails. So my friend Laurel, who's this bright, beautiful person, said to me, Laurel, you have to introduce yourself to Bobby and tell him your story. And I said, oh, no. That is not going to happen. It's not appropriate. And no, not going to happen. And of course, she didn't listen to me because she was a good friend and she was not going to allow me to miss out on my opportunity to meet Bobby and tell him of my love of him. Because even though I once spoke to him on the phone, I had never met him as Laurel. I had only spoken to him as my boss's assistant, which is not the same thing. So I watch horrified as Laurel goes up to Bobby and says, can my friend Laurel come and say hi to you? You were the first man she ever loved when she was 8 years old, or something like that. And Bobby, who truly is one of the nicest people ever. Now, you hear all kinds of things about in the entertainment industry, and the only thing I ever heard about him was how kind he was. And he, of course, could not have been kinder. He just lit up and he said, of course. And Lori, gestures me over, and I had had a few cocktails. And so I was a little bit light and fluffy, although not sloppy. And I gushed. I was like, Bobby, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm sure you must hear this a lot, but I was 8 years old and you were the first man I ever loved. And I used to listen to your song, Julie, 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 do you love me? as I stared at your album, and it was super cool that 20 something years later, I would finally get to talk to you. So my little 8-year-old girl is very happy right now. And he could not have been nicer about it. Truly gracious. And I have a picture with Bobby at the party. So Bobby, I think my cousin, and our friend Lori might have been in it as well. I'll post it on my Facebook page. Just go to Illuminating Souls on Facebook and I'll post the picture so you can see it. And so it's one of these cool, slow manifesting stories that I think about how when we talk about how even in stillness there is motion, that I think there's something profoundly magical that my 8-year-old self put this dream out into the world. And it would take a little bit over 20 years, but that dream would come true. And not because I efforted into it, right? It's not like I wrote to him and stalked him or went to one of his fan events. I don't even know if he does them, but that serendipity, right? Just those cool molecules of co-creation and magical manifesting came together to recognize one of my sweet dreams. And that delights my heart so much, I can't even tell you that somehow it happened. That my friend on the phones would look over and say, Laurel, Bobby Sherman is calling. Those words, right? Laurel, Bobby Sherman's calling. How I had dreamed of that moment, and there it was. And then that I got to meet him and tell him of my love of him, but in a way that wasn't creepy, was cool too. And so thank you for letting me share with you about my Bobby Sherman story, the first man I ever loved, and who I would absolutely get to meet at one point, and that he would be kind about it. That's just very sweet. And so I just invite you to contemplate who were your celebrity crushes when you were growing up. You know, they hold this very sweet, chaste place, I think, in our hearts. At least for me, they did, you know. It was a time of such innocence. You know, we didn't have the internet back then, so all we knew was what was really presented to us on television or in the magazines. And so it was very sweet. And I'll always just be grateful for the delight that line of energy brought me. And I've had many other experiences, you know, that bring me delight that happen years later. You know, when you think something has gone dormant or something is in stillness, all of a sudden, it's like the seed germinating, you know, and it cracks open and the line of energy is there again. The invitation comes forward again. And so over the years, I've really learned to trust that my prayers and intentions are always floating about. They are doing what they do, even if I am unaware of it. And that moments of serendipity and awesomeness are being woven on our behalf. It's like the surfer at the edge of the ocean. Some days the waves are awesome and you get the ride of your life. And other days you may just float. You may just float and maybe a dolphin will come by. And won't that be cool? We don't always have to be in the driver's seat when it comes to manifestation. sometimes we get to just sit back and know that across the timeline of our life or lifetimes, many seeds have been planted. And there will always be something that will show up and brighten our day or week or month or life. This Bobby Sherman story has given me a lot of mileage over the years. And I love being able to look back at my life and see all of those God moments. Those moments when something special happened, not because I pushed so hard or forced it into being, but because I just happened to be where I was supposed to be in that moment. And something divine took place. Yes. It's like how you meet someone because you happen to be at the right place at the right time. Those moments happen to all of us. And I love to live my life open to those experiences because we can't make them happen, can't force them, but they exist for all of us. It's like finding the penny on the ground. It just happens when it's supposed to. So here's to the magic that is present on your timeline as well. Because here is what I know. If it is present on my timeline, it is present on yours. So here's to dreams coming true, even if it takes decades. Here's to experiences that will delight your spirit and warm your heart. You are a magical, beautiful being of light, and there is such goodness here for you. Trust that with the kind of knowingness in which you trust that the sun will come up tomorrow. And I will not start singing the song because hopefully you're asleep by now or drifting off, or you can queue up another episode and I will ramble some more in your ear. So know this, know that the angels and I love you and that we appreciate you and that we are sending out prayers for you to have a good rest, and that magic visits upon your doorstep soon in a way that will delight you and make you giggle and make you say, oh, that's what Laurel was talking about. And if one of those moments shows up, feel free to share it with me. I love those kinds of moments. So all right, my sweet ones, you rest well. Know that you are loved. And I am deeply grateful for you. Sweet dreams. Thank you.